Hello, I'm Kevin Turner and welcome to this week's Realty Talk Show. Following a decade in the doldrums, property values in Perth soared nearly 26% from the COVID onset to the July 2022 peak. Since then, property prices in WA have continued to soar, with growth of just under 20% in the last 12 months alone. Realty Marketplace is reporting national buyers agents and interstate investors are flooding the market there as they seek to cash in. So in this show, Bushy asks long-term local WA property entrepreneur, investor advocate Ashleigh Goodchild if it's too late. Have we seen the best out of WA and is it time to look elsewhere? In the second part of our show, we discover that part of being a good investor in any asset class is understanding the power of leverage. So it follows with new technology and the improvements in AI that you might just be tempted to say, well, to hell with it. I can manage my own property and I'll save heaps of time and much less frustration. So we've invited industry veteran, highly respected property management consultant and international best-selling author Brigitte Stills to outline just what is involved. Because that way, if you still decide to go ahead and do it alone, you're going to be better prepared and also decide if that is the best use of your time. Hey, before we start, I want to say a special thanks to our supporters and content partners, realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance, Get Rare Property, and Apiro Marketing. And if this is your first time with us, a big welcome. You're going to find us on all podcast players and through the Southern Cross Oz Stereo Network. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, help us to continue to bring you the best guests every week. Join the conversation anytime too on Facebook at the Property Hub Collective. And we'll be back in just a moment.
Property deductions can save you thousands of dollars each year. To make sure you maximise deductions, you need to work with the most experienced quantity surveyor in the country. BMT Tax Depreciation is the leading specialist in the industry. They've completed over 700,000 tax deduction schedules for residential investment and commercial properties Australia-wide. BMT guarantee to find double your fee in the first full financial year deductions. Call BMT on 1300 728 726 today for an obligation-free quote. Realty Talk and your host, Bushy Martin.
WAs have always had an experience, a somewhat polarising property picture, and many property aficionados find it fairly hard to forget the last resource-dependent lost property decade. So to add some intimate local knowledge to the debate, in order to find out what's really happening on the ground and where it's all headed in the West, we're joined again by long-term local WA property entrepreneur, investor advocate and property management specialist, Ashleigh Goodchild, a director of SoCode Property and founder of her PM Collective and property profiling businesses. So welcome back to the show, Ash.
Thank you.
Ash, this is going to be a great subject because there's a lot of focus on WA and there has been for quite some months now. So just to kick things off, can you give us a bit of a picture of what's actually happening with local property conditions in WA?
Yeah, I get so excited talking about this topic because what we see in the media is sometimes it's the same, but it's quite different on the ground as specifically for the rental market. So we'll talk about the buying market to start off with. So we found that it also started about 3-4 years ago and, everyone wanted their 3 or 4 bedroom home, 700 square metre block under 400,000. That was very popular price point. And we have now seen that change a lot in the last 3 years. The sales home opens, you will find properties selling within maybe 3 days, 4 days, I would say. Very interesting. I actually had one of the internet advertising portal sales reps coming to the office today, and they were saying to me how they're advertising their properties in the first 7 days to the interstate market to market the properties. Yeah. And I said, 7 days, it's taking you to advertise that the property is sold by then. Like, you need to do this quicker. And so we are definitely seeing sales agents being inundated with inquiries within 4 to 6 hours of the property being listed. We are seeing home opens cancelled before they get to the home open because buyers have offered a very good price on the condition that that home opens removed. There's definitely that happening. So it's not uncommon for home opens to be cancelled last minute. We are seeing people panic buying, and we're seeing home opens obviously very large. We are also seeing, when I go to home opens, not only a flood of property managers and buyers agents attending, but also parents that are attending with their 30-something-year-old children, that, you know, the 30 to 35-year-old age group. And I think there's going to be a lot of parents that are allowing their children to use equity in their home to help buy them. So that's what we're seeing on the ground. The rental market is a little bit different. We see stories in the media where home opens have got 100 people coming through, and that's actually not the case. It's very different. We're definitely seeing the rental market slow down, and we're seeing it slow down consistently with how investors that have been buying. If I can mention sort of suburbs, you know, down in the Rockingham area, City of Rockingham was the first area that was popular with buying. And it's also, I'm finding, the first area to slow down with the rental market, where before we might get 30, 50 people through a home open, now we see around 5.
Interesting. Is that going to flow through into rents then, do you think? Because once that demand starts to ease out of it, when the rent renewals come into play, in, say, 6 or 12 months' time, those investors who rushed in on the back of getting quite high yields, given that level of demand, do you think they're going to see them soften off a little bit?
Yeah, I think the people that did buy at the start will be fine. Their yields are always going to be pretty good. It's the people who I say are late to the party and have come to the party. I mean, I still get phone calls from people, you know, this week wanting to buy in Perth, and I say, you're 3 years too late, just about, but there's definitely still good buying happening. But yeah, we're definitely seeing it with the price point. I think that in the past we were maybe doing 1 home open to get those inquiries. Now we're seeing 3 home opens and potential price drops in rent. But generally, the price drop in the rental marketing is quite interesting, because the property was probably always worth that lower amount. So if I'll just use, for example, the property was always worth $520 per week. That was the price that a property manager gave. But an owner says, I want $550 per week because it's a rental crisis and I hear there's no properties available. So what happens is the property does go, you know what, even though it's a rental crisis, people won't overpay for a property. I think tenants are very rent savvy. And so it's taking a little bit for a landlord's mindset to adjust to what the media is saying versus what a property manager's on the ground experience is saying. And we just need to wait for that adjustment to happen, for landlords to sort of see that, and then to make sure their property is priced reasonably for the market to get that. So as you know, if an investor's listening, I always say that if your property is on the market for rent, you do want to be seeing, like right now, at least 5 people through the first home open. If you get 0 to 1 inquiries or 1 person attending that home open, I would suggest that you could potentially be a bit too high with your price, and I would speak to your property manager about that. If you have a situation where you've got 30 or 40 people coming through, you might have been a little bit too conservative, I will use the word, conservative with your pricing. But the great thing is, as a landlord, is that you're going to now get a choice of applications and not feel pressured for one. So I see a lot of positives with that. We are definitely seeing that the frenzy with the rental market is definitely sitting in the 1 to 2 bedroom unit space. And every time we list a unit for that's 1 or 2 bedrooms, we have to cap our viewings off at 30 or 40 attendees. And that's consistent with migration and a lot of students coming in, a lot of people, just even couples from over east coming into Perth for work. They're really wanting those 1 to 2 bedroom units. So they're getting very good prices at the moment, and there's definitely a lot of competition there.
Very interesting. Well, I'd love your thoughts then on, and you've touched on this a little bit already, but to dive into it a bit deeper, Ash, what impact is the sort of feeding frenzy from the interstate buyers agents and investors having on the property performance in WA?
I'm definitely seeing people potentially overpay. I'm seeing people getting into that panic buying where they're not really coming back to the numbers. Like, you need to come back to the numbers and make sure it works. That is definitely what we're seeing. And I guess what creates this as well is a lot of, if I can say, Facebook groups and community groups around where everyone likes to share their good stories, or I bought here and I'm getting this much per week for rent. And everyone's very rushed to try and not miss the boat. But really, I think you need to come back to the core reason and not just what your friends or your family have done and their experience with investing. Really just coming back to the numbers, making sure they work. People are still getting really good numbers and good yields in properties. And what I like the way that I work is making sure that investors are educated with how other investors are buying. So just today I had a phone call from someone who was looking at buying a property that I had appraised for $630 per week, and the agent had it advertised for sale looking for offers around $700,000. So my role would be to, and I encourage everyone to have someone who can give this insight too, is for me to say, listen, if you are buying a property that is around $700,000, most of my clients that I'm seeing would want to be seeing around a $690 per week return to $700 per week return. That's consistent with what other investors are doing. So if this property only has a $630 per week return and it's $700,000, my job is to say to you, listen, I mean, you can buy it if you want to buy it, but it's not consistent with other investor buying. So I want investors to take that into account, that whatever property you buy, just make sure that it's, it's consistent with what everyone's doing. It's a real big thing of mine. And again, staying true to your things, your requirements, your budget, because at the end of the day, you're the one that's got to pay that mortgage.
Absolutely right. Exactly right. So given that we've seen the bull run in WA for quite some time now, and in 3 or 4 years it's been in the run, and normally property markets go through a bit of an S-curve. Well, I'll have 2 or 3 years of really strong growth, and then it'll tend to plateau for a period of time and before it goes through its next growth spike. How long do you believe that WA's current run is going to last, and what's likely to happen then, and when do you think?
Yeah, I think naturally with any growth that people have, or any market growth that markets have, everyone just assumes there's going to be a big drop. And the experts in WA are not suggesting that. So what we're all hoping for, obviously, is we've had the growth. We do hope to see that plateau. The experts, and I agree that I think 2 years, we're still going to see some good growth. If I was to share a personal opinion, I would say we've still got about 20% growth over the next couple of years. I think it's too hard to suggest any further than that. So I still, like I said, still think it's a great time to buy. I just think you just got to be mindful of it. I don't feel like we're going to get that big drop. You hear sometimes people saying, oh, I'll wait for the market to drop before buying, and I don't think you're going to get that. Our affordability is still pretty good in Perth. Our tenant affordability is still sitting at 30%. I think we've still got a bit of a buffer, even when it comes to affordability with people paying rent. I think that renters, and I don't want to get crucified for saying this, I think renters have got a little bit more of a buffer in terms of their affordability to be consistent with other states in the country as well.
Yeah, well said, extremely well said. So getting out the old crystal ball then, Ash, where and what do you think are the long-term sustainable rental growth opportunities in WA, and what's your reason for thinking that?
Yeah, we've got to wait for, we need this building market to start improving so we can build more houses. That's a really big thing. I think that our government's done a really good job with trying to bring in different grants, and none of them are making a massive impact, but they're all making a small impact, which is great. But I think that long term, we are going to see the best properties be around that 550,000. If you can purchase around 550, I think you're buying with that capacity and a little bit of a buffer. So for me, I think that's a great budget. I think 3x1s are a really good option for people to consider, especially for your first home, because it's going to provide hopefully potential for you to buy a second or third, which is where I really think the financial freedom of being an investor comes in. It's very hard with only one property. So a 3x1's great. And the reason why I love a 3x1 is because it's so diverse with who can rent that property. So for me, I'm very big about making sure that your property is attractive to the largest type of demographic that we've got. So looking at a 3x1, it's going to be suitable for singles. It's going to be suitable for couples, small families, 2 friends. So we're capturing like a lot there, and potentially even larger families that don't have the means to buy something or to rent something more expensive. They'll make good with the 3x1. They'll put the children in a bunk bed in the bedrooms, and they can manage around that. Where a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, absolutely, like if you can afford it, great. But we are really restricting ourselves to those larger families, and it's not going to be suitable for a single, or might not be suitable for a couple. So we have got less of a market maybe wanting that. And I think as time goes on, affordable housing is always going to be needed, and trying to keep within those means of the regular person is going to be really important. So for me, it's in this market right now, it's a 3x1. It's as close as you can get to 550. It is, I've seen definitely a change in the size of blocks happening at the moment. Yep. So from a rental point of view, I don't think block size really affects the rent that people are willing to pay, because some tenants see value in a big block, some see value in a small block because it's low maintenance. So the rental value is not really there. But you're buying cheaper if you can buy a 300 or a 400 square metre block. And now I know we all want the big block, but if you can't afford a big block, buy what you can afford. I've definitely seen that shift with investors having to buy that smaller block just to get into the Perth market. And I think that long term, that's what renters are going to be wanting, and ultimately that's your customer and who you want to rent it.
Totally agree. Locationally, I mean, at 550, that's starting to push out now, down south in particular. Probably sort of Bunbury, Mandurah Bunbury way these days versus where it was a couple of years ago in Rockingham. Do you see that continuing? And when the market does sort of plateau, are those areas going to be affected, do you think, from a rental performance perspective?
Yeah, so trending suburbs at the moment are definitely down in that Greenfields and Mandurah location, definitely in Bunbury as well. Bunbury, people definitely have tried getting into that market, but it's still classed as regional. So there's definitely a bit of a divide with who feels comfortable with regional or not. There was actually a buyer's agent that went down there not long ago, and I remember he called me up and he said, Ash, where do people get their money from in Bunbury? There's nothing here. Like, it's just houses. Like, how do they earn money? I was like, I don't know. I don't know them for the Bunbury market. But I definitely do get asked a bit about it. Greenfields and the Mandurah area, there is, we've got a good train system. So I know a lot of people that live down in Mandurah and train it up to work in the city. So definitely Mandurah was once, it's a place where if you want a weekend away, but you want to be close to Perth, you'd go stay there. So I used to always see Mandurah as quite seasonal, where we're definitely seeing more long-term there. And then, so the clients that are wanting the bigger block established homes, that's definitely where they're moving. If people are more comfortable with a smaller block and a newer home, going north of the river is a great option. And you've got areas like Alkimos and Yanchep. What I love, and if it was up to me and I had a choice, I would personally go north. I always say the sun shines a bit brighter north, and I like the oceans up that way. But the train line, is being extended to Yanchep. We've got the new builds, but with any new land estate and with a huge influx of new builds in the area, you're going to have to hold on to it long term to let that growth go through its cycle, because you've got a whole heap of new builds. They all look the same. They all offer the same. They're all coming onto the market at the same time. And because of that, the only way you can differentiate the property is by price. So there's nothing you can do to create opportunity. So for me, long-term hold, I think north of the river would be a great spot. And I think the future of younger people are going to gravitate towards the north and the newer home, and the beach and the train line's going to be up and running. I think it'll be a very popular choice for them.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, and it's I'm glad you mentioned the greenfield stuff, because it does dilute capital growth as a scarcity factor tends to dilute somewhat. But if you're looking for the very long term, then you can still do well in those, like particularly with lifestyle locations like you're talking, where there's the beach and the coffee culture and the easy access to the city that goes with the brilliant system they have in Perth with the rail and the freeways each side. It's really sets the standard as far as what the rest of Australia should be doing, actually. But look, Ash, really appreciate your thoughts on that and sharing your intimate, local, hands-on perspective on what's going on. We encourage anyone who'd like to learn more to reach out to you at ashleighgoodchild.com.au by clicking the link in the show notes. But thanks again for sharing all of this with us here on the show today, Ash.
Thanks for having me.
Successful property investment is a game of finance. Do you have the right team and the right game plan? Realty Talk is brought to you by Know How Property. More than mortgage brokers, Bushy Martin and his team of investment architects set you up with a sustainable strategy structured to lower your costs, tax, risk and stress while increasing your capacity for growth. Know How has helped over 1,900 homeowners and investors secure more than $800 million in property wealth. So get set to live more, work less, and live your legacy. Want to know how to invest in your freedom? Visit knowhowproperty.com.au. This is Realty Talk, powered by realty.com.au.
Well, in our continuing property management series, to help you consider the best way to manage your property, this week we're joined by industry veteran Brigitte Stills, an international best-selling author who's a highly respected property management consultant, coach and mentor, who draws on her 44 plus years of experience in property to help professionals with rent roll growth, systems, procedures, and much more. So welcome to Realty Talk, Brigitte.
Thank you. So good to be here today.
Loving it. And I always like talking to people who had very long depth and breadth of experience in the industry, because as you and I know, the more things change, the more they actually stay the same in a lot of cases. So I guess to set the scene, Brigitte, can you sort of remind us of the full scope of activities required to manage a rental property?
Yes, look, things haven't changed that much when it comes to what you need to manage your property. I mean, with all this AI and technology and everything that we're facing at the moment, and, you know, people starting to think about using AI for this and that and the other, we still have a tendency to go back to what works best for us and what we're experienced in and what gives us what we are looking for. I mean, if you're going to be managing a property, I mean, as an agent or whoever you are going to be, I mean, the first thing you need to do is you need to go and inspect the property to make sure it complies, and provide a report to the vendor or to the landlord investor, and then find out whether they want to, you know, organise a depreciation report. They may want to do that now, or they may want to do it sometime down the track, and ensure that, you know, you have the right technology in place to manage that property. I mean, you've got to be able to collect the rent. You've got to be able to have a trust account to put the rent in to ensure that you can receipt it. To ensure you can collect the bond in a right way, that you can, you know, disperse it to the correct authorities, depending on what state you're in. And, you know, it's all about the tenancy, setting up the tenancy once you've got the tenant and ensuring that you can do this. But then you've got to go and find the tenant. You know, you've got to have the right marketing tools available to you. And that's got a lot to do with technology. You need to ensure that you can have photography available, and you've got to ensure that your landlord, investor, knows exactly what you are doing and what the requirements are from that investor for you to go forward with, you know, with this information. You've got to be able to handle repairs adequately, and you've got to be able to register them. And you've got to have this communication technique where you can, ring your investor and ensure that they're happy with what you're doing, and making sure that the tenant is aware as well. So there's some of the things that you need to know about going forward when you get that property under your sleeve, and make sure that you've got it sealed up, and then you can actually market it correctly for that landlord.
Absolutely, and for those that are contemplating doing themselves or already doing it, with the continuously introduced rental reforms and the increases in compliance and the very strict legalities around issuing notices and whatnot, it's certainly not an area for young and naive players. But I guess for those landlord investors that are considering the sort of DIY self-management style, what do we need to know to manage the property ourselves?
Look, you need to have an understanding of the Landlord and Tenancy Act. I know that's a big thing to ask, but if you're going to be managing your property, and you're going to be responsible and accountable for that tenant that's in there, that's going to be paying rent to you, you got to know exactly what it is that you're doing. And it's not one of these things that you go and read up online and say, oh, they say I need to do this and that and the other. You got to have a firm understanding, and you got to know a little bit about the Privacy Act. You can't go knocking on the door at 8 o'clock at night to say to the tenant, well, you reported a repair. I've got the tradesman coming in an hour. Can he come in? You can't do that. We've had instances in the past where we've had landlords that have been in touch with me, and they've said, oh, I'm managing my own property and the tenant won't let me come in and let the plumber through to fix the leaking tap. And I said, why is that? She said, I don't know. And I said, when did you go there? She said, at 8 o'clock at night. And I said, you can't do that. You can only access the property from 8 o'clock to about 5:30 of an evening. You can't go knocking on the door. You can't go knocking on the door on a Sunday. And unfortunately, unless you have a little bit of knowledge about the Privacy Act, you're just going to be pushed out that little further. And subsequently, that relationship that you may have thought that you had with that tenant, you haven't got anymore. So you've just got to, make sure that you're on the right page. You've got to be able to handle arrears. You've got to be able to know what it is that you're going to be sending out to that tenant in regards to, late rental payments. You've got to keep notes of your discussions with that tenant. You've got to be able to keep all of that somewhere. So technology is a very important thing. And the tenant may say, look, I want my ledger. We've paid rent for the last 3 months. I want a copy of my ledger. And subsequently, you've got to be able to deliver that. So there is a lot of things that you need to know. And of course, you need to know a little bit about the tribunals. It doesn't matter what state you're in Australia, you got to know how they operate, how they function, and where you sit in regards to that tenant wanting to take you on for any reason whatsoever. And, have you met compliance with regards to your property? Have you had somebody look through it and make sure that it was okay? We had somebody that phoned us up recently, and they moved into a property. This was a tenant actually that was leasing through an owner. Now that owner had varnished the floors the day before. It didn't dry. These people went in, started moving their furniture in, and all the varnish came off the floor onto their goods and chattels, onto their shoes. Subsequently, they damaged the property. So here was this massive dispute with the owner and the new tenant who hadn't even quite moved in yet. So they are the things that you need to be aware of. So, if nothing else fails, go and get yourself landlord insurance. Make sure you're covered with landlord insurance, because you're going to need something like that. But it's knowing where you sit as an owner investor, and why would you want to stress yourself out to that regard to be able to manage your own property?
Very good commentary, and I think the issue now is that for a lot of DIY landlords, you just don't know what you don't know, because the legislation's changing all the time. There's this continual ripple effect of rental reforms that are moving across all states progressively. And the legal side and the slant in tribunals, as you well mentioned, towards really protecting the interests of the tenant primarily, means that just because you've read the Act, it doesn't mean that it's going to be interpreted that way when it gets in front of someone who's making a legal decision about it. So there's a lot there, and I think the other really key point that you made, Brigitte, was around landlord insurance. And I think one of the mistakes I see a lot of investors making is they just buy the cheapest landlord insurance off the rack from one of the big insurers. But as you and I know, the specialist landlord insurers who focus on landlord and property investment insurance have policies that are generally far better and have better protections and generally pay out more quickly than relying on a off-the-shelf cheapie that you might be thinking that you're getting land insurance, because the proof's in the pie. It's when you make the claim that you find out how good that policy is. So I love that. What I'd like to dig into a bit more detail, if we can, Brigitte, are the risks associated with DIY self-management. We've touched on some of them, but can you expand on those for us?
Yes, I think one of the strongest one is what you were just talking about, having the right landlord insurance policy. There are a number of them out there. You know, you can buy them at the supermarket now, you can buy them online, but do you really read the fine print? Do you know what you're actually covered for? You know, are you covered for self-management of your own property? I mean, there's some actually that don't cover this. And people don't understand that unless they have somebody that gives them advice on this, whether it be your accountant or whether it be somebody of that nature. So it is really very important if you're going to be self-managing. But at the end of the day, why would you self-manage in this day and age when there are so many instances out there? I mean, why would you want to end up at the tribunal? I mean, how much experience do you have going to a tribunal? I've seen owners at tribunals. I acted for an agent not so long ago. And I was sitting at the back there and I saw this poor woman at the front, you know, presenting herself. And she had a young couple that was in the property and they had created some damage and she was wanting to make a claim. But because she didn't understand the legislation and she didn't understand how to go about this, subsequently the case was thrown out. And she walked away in tears. And I can totally appreciate that. And, you know, the tenant walked away with a smile on their face. So you really, really need to know a little bit about what you're doing. You know, regarding reference checking, how well can you reference check your tenant? If you don't know the privacy legislation and if you've got all these documents in front of you and you're going to ring up the owner, you're going to ring up this tenant's you know, workplace and you're going to be talking to their manager and anything like that, they don't have to give you any information because that's under the privacy legislation. They're not obligated to give you any information.
Yeah.
So what documentation they give you attached to their application for tenancy, you basically can't reference check. You can go online, you can do searches like we all do, Facebook, LinkedIn, any of those, you know, those sources and see what anybody says about that particular person. But can you go to the bank? Can you talk to somebody in their office? Can you talk to various people? No, you may have the ledger that says this tenant's paid umpteen months of rent in front of you and you look at it and say, oh, they've been 2 days late. Oh, they're okay. But their circumstances may have changed.
Yeah.
You know, are you going to say to that tenant, I want 3 pay slips consecutively? That tenant can say to you or that applicant say to you, well, no, I'm not going to give you that. And they don't have to. So you're going to discriminate? You know, it's a very fine line. It's a very fine line and it's a tricky one. And if you have a disagreement, well, you know, where do you sit? Where do you stand with regards to that? The applicant can provide you so much information and you just have to accept it. It's what you do with it whilst you are trying to engage this conversation of finding out more. You just don't know. You know, how are you going to manage repairs and maintenance if you don't know how to go about this? You're going to check all your repairers, your plumbers, your electricians have all got all registered and they all have their licenses and they're insured? Or you're going to get someone, this happens all the time, where a landlord says, oh, look, my friend down the road, he does my plumbing. He comes in and then he doesn't do it right. There's a leak and it floods a kitchen bathroom. I've seen that over the years that I've been in the business.
Yeah.
You know, it's all these things are so tricky and they're so concerning that, you know, why would you put yourself through this drama? Why not pay your 6 to 8% management fee, whatever it may be, and have peace of mind at the end of the day and not have that thought in your mind, if I don't do this right, I could end up at the tribunal, I could be sued. You know, you're going to tell the tenant, no, you can't burn candles at night, where in some states it's illegal to do that. I live in a block of units, and a couple of times the fire brigades come along, and you know we had to pay what $1,500 for the fire brigade to attend, and it was a tenant that was burning a candle, and that set the fire alarms off.
Yeah.
Subsequently, if this happens to you as a landlord, you're going to be faced with having to pay for that fire brigade to attend. Doesn't matter what state you're in; it's exactly the same thing. How are
Yeah.
you going to carry out routine inspections?
Yes, well, and know when you can
Yeah.
do them now, because that's changed quite considerably in recent times, when you can conduct them and how you can conduct them. So it's certainly a moving feast. And I guess one of the other things too that I wouldn't mind you commenting on, Bridget, is that I think one of the traps for new players in this game is if you don't issue the right notice in exactly the right time frame, then the whole thing can unwind, because, again, if you're not complying strictly to the letter of the law as far as the legislation goes, you can really prejudice your own position by not being absolutely precise on what you issue when. Now, what are your thoughts on that?
Look, most definitely. You can't, you know, like some owners just go knocking on the door and say, I want to do a routine inspection, or I want to send the plumber through, or whatever. You can't do that. You've got to be able to, you've got to be able to provide a notice. If you want to go and inspect a property here in New South Wales, it's 7 days. You've got to provide 7 days notice, in writing. You've got to ensure that the tenant has actually received the notice. I mean, as an agent, we can go through the property, we take somebody else along with us, and we can open the door and we can go in there. You know, we phone the tenant and say, look, you haven't responded. Subsequently, we're going to be doing this and that and the other. Depending on how they react, you will do it. As an owner, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. That's incorrect entry, and that's once again under the privacy legislation. So you just can't access. If you're wanting to serve a rental increase, are you going to give the right notice? Do you know when you're going to give the right notice? How are you going to calculate the rent? What processes are you going to use to do that? Should you wish to terminate the tenant for any reason? Do you know the process for terminating that particular tenant for whatever? Are you going to disclose why you're terminating them? Or are you not going to say anything, and then that tenant comes and knocks on your door, which they have done, and said, you've issued me with a notice. I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. And that's happened many times where somebody said, I'm not leaving. And then subsequently that investor has to go to the tribunal to evict that tenant. And then one of the things is question at the tribunal, what were the processes? What line of communication did you have? How many meetings did you have? Where are your records? Show me your documentation. Do you have those?
And the issue, of course, and I'm not sure up to speed with what's happening in New South Wales, Bridget, but if you have to take an issue to a tribunal, often it can be months away before you even get a hearing. So if you've got a situation like that where a tenant says, I'm not moving, we all know the law tends towards looking after the tenant in the first instance. So you could potentially have a tenant in there for months in a fairly conflicting situation before you even get it looked at the tribunal. So there's a lot of interesting challenges there.
Well, tribunals can be postponed anything up to 3 times. I mean, if the tenant decides that, they want to go away on leave, on holidays or whatever, it doesn't suit them, they can postpone it. They can postpone it for ill health. They can postpone it for their job won't allow them to take the time off. So subsequently, you have got 3 months before your hearing is actually heard. And 3 months of no rent.
Yeah, exactly. And tenants are increasingly much more au fait and aware with exactly what the legislation says, and smart tenants can play the game. They can extend things out within the letter of the law to favour their position. So there's certainly some raft of risks there. Let's flip the equation now, Bridget, and let's talk about the benefits of engaging a good property manager. Can you take us through those?
Well, apart from peace of mind, I think it would be peace of mind, and not having the stress of having to worry about ensuring that tenant's looked after. I think the biggest challenge would be is to ensure that you've got the right tenant in your property. And I think having a good property manager that's looking after, your business, basically your investment property, they're going to take that responsibility off your shoulders. They're going to ensure that they choose the right tenant. They're going to reference check. They've got all these documents in front of them. They can do all kinds of checks because they're covered under the privacy legislation. If they ring up an employer and say, I'm so-and-so from this real estate office, well, there's more, the employer is more susceptible to have a discussion with them. The other real estate agent where that tenant's come from and leased before, of course, there's an obligation to cooperate with one another and to collaborate. Subsequently, they're going to release any information. So you're covered in that regard. And you're meeting legal compliance. They know all about the legalities. And, at the end of the year, you're going to have your end of year financial statement and without having to worry about it. You're going to get your rent on time unless there's a dispute or there's something, wrong. These are some of the most important things, and you're covered by the agency's insurance, but you still need to ensure that you have, landlord insurance on your side as well. You do need to have that policy anyway. Yeah. But as far as all of that goes, I think you're more secure by having a real estate agent looking after your property than you doing it yourself. I mean, look at the dispute resolutions that you can be dealing with if you're managing on your own, Subsequently, you're passing it on to somebody else that's going to take the liability of all of this. They're going to be looking after you and your interests. And they're going to increase your rent when at the right time. There's no point of bringing up and saying you haven't increased my rent because they know they're going to have to do that. That's part of the agreement that you're signing up with that particular agent.
Very well said. Now, I guess given the amount of churn that we're seeing in the property management industry, for those of us looking to choose and engage the right property manager to best suit us and our property, what do we need to know to close out on, Brigitte?
Look, I think one of the most important things is that if you're going to be engaging a property manager, you need to find the right real estate agency for you. And it's a matter of maybe talking to 2 or 3 in your area or the area that your property is in, and ensuring that that property manager has the ability to manage your property. And by that, I mean, do they have the experience? How long have they been with that agent? How many years have they been a property manager? What's their reputation like? These are most important things, and I'd be asking. And communication skills. And one of the most important things I find with property managers is their listening ability. Some have a tendency not to listen too much. They overtalk. And the most important thing I find that if you're a property manager, you've got to be able to listen. You've got to be able to listen to the owner, most definitely, but you've got to be able to listen to the applicant, to the tenant, and you've got to be able to decipher what it is they're saying to you. It doesn't make sense. So those sorts of things are very important. The reputation of the agency, to ensure that they've got a good reputation. How many properties does that property manager manage? Are they going to be the one managing your property, or are they going to be passing it on to somebody in the next chair? Are they going to be staying? Are they solid? Are they secure? Are they happy in their position? These are all things that you might say, well, you need to be a bit of a psychologist. But I think at the end of the day, you just need to ask a lot of questions, and as a property owner myself, look, it's all about relationship building and making sure that you have this conversation with the property manager and that you're all on the same page. And you ensuring as a property owner, saying to them, I'm relying on you to look after my asset. Please keep in touch with me and let me know what's going on. And make sure that you get these emails or get these text messages or whatever, however, you decide that you want to communicate. But that's the most important thing, and that helps your investment grow. It helps your capital appreciation, having a good, solid property manager in place for you that's going to look after your property.
Very well said. I know we've only just scratched the surface, but there's a very timely reminders on the very critical importance of good property management to both performance of the property and risk. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to share all of this with us here on the Property Hub. Thank you, Brigitte.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Are you curious about harnessing your super for property investment? Propel your future with the enlightening online seminar, The Ultimate Masterclass to self-managed super fund property mastery. Reserve your spot now at getrare.com.au/SMSF. Spearheaded by Rusty from independent buyers agency Get Rare Properties, this masterclass unravels strategic property investment using your self-managed superannuation fund. You know, it's not just about learning, it's about transforming your financial future through education. So embrace this opportunity to enrich your investing acumen. Enroll now in the free masterclass and begin a journey that marries insight with action, leading to a financially empowered tomorrow.
Unlock bonus content now as a premium subscriber.
And that brings us to the end of this week's show. Make sure that you don't miss a single episode of Realty Talk or Bushy's Get Invested podcast, delivered to you each week, and you can do that by subscribing to the Property Hub now on your favourite podcast player or wherever you are listening to or watching the show. Also, you can join the conversation anytime on Facebook. Just simply search the Property Hub Collective. Just before we go, I want to say a special thanks to our supporters and content partners, realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance, Get Rare Property, and Apiro Marketing. I'm Kevin Turner, and on behalf of Bushy Martin and the whole Property Hub team, we look forward to seeing you again next week.